Greetings, everybody from all over the world, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Christiana Politis, and on behalf of Yangchenma Arts and Music, I'm so happy to co-host this very special event, Mudra and the Diamond Spheres, exploring topics of transmission of Mudra with such incredible experts in their field. So on a technical note, you will see you have a small Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Time permitting, at the end of each lecture, we will have an opportunity to ask questions to our speakers. So at any time throughout the talk, you can write your questions in the Q&A. Mudra and the Diamond Spheres is part of a much larger, beautiful project by the Core of Culture. And I would like to introduce Joseph Hausil, the Director of Core of Culture. He will introduce this project and our program for the coming weeks. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome to Mudra and the Diamond Spheres, the new project produced by Core of Culture. This project receives its lead funding from the Robert H.N. Ho Family Foundation and additional support from the Kipper Family Foundation. We thank you very much. I'd like also to thank the speakers and panelists and to everyone attending today. You're in for a real treat with this panel of specialists. Tabu Monastery is a 1,000-year-old monastery that sits in East India, very near the border of Tibet. In fact, very near where Western explorers entered into Tibet. Tabu Monastery is famous for a number of things. Not least among them is a 1,000-year-old assembly hall in the form of a 3-dimensional Vajradhatu mandala. 2 years ago, I met the abbot of Tabu Monastery who asked me if Core of Culture would please document the Vajradhatu ritual they perform inside this 1,000-year-old Vajradhatu mandala, and we agreed to help them in any way that we could. In the course of researching this ritual, the Vajradhatu ritual, we learned that His Holiness the Dalai Lama came to Tabu in 1996, and he confirmed, yes, this is a 3-dimensional, 1,000-year-old Vajradhatu mandala, and he wondered why the monks there were not performing the Vajradhatu ritual that would be done in the Vajradhatu mandala hall. And so over 2 trips, the Dalai Lama returned to Tabu and reintroduced the Vajradhatu ritual by reinitiating and re-empowering the monks to do it. The Vajradhatu ritual has been performed at Tabu since 2005. We noticed in the research there was a correlation in the mudra, or the empowered hand gestures, the esoteric sign language of the ancient world, a connection in the mudra between the living practice of Buddhism in the Vajradhatu ritual and in the 1,000-year-old art. And so we begin this project with Tabu Monastery with an exploration of mudra. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to my friend, Dr. Donald Lopez. Donald Lopez is the professor of Buddhist and Tibetan studies at the University of Michigan. A great scholar, he is important in Buddhist publishing as an editor and as a prolific author. My pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Donald Lopez.
Thank you, Joseph. Mudra is a beautiful word in a beautiful language, Sanskrit. It means a sign or a mark or an insignia, and came to mean a seal or a stamp, a distinguishing mark that certifies authenticity. Thus, in Buddhist philosophy, we have the 4 seals, 4 doctrines that a philosophical school must uphold, 4 seals that certify that a school is Buddhist. The 4 seals are: all conditioned things are impermanent, all contaminated things are miserable, all phenomena are selfless, and nirvana is peace. In Tantric Buddhism, the mudra is the sexual consort of the yogin, and thus we read of the dhyana mudra, the wisdom seal, and the karma mudra, the action seal. Renowned in Tibetan Buddhism is Mahamudra, a teaching that we associate with Milarepa and the Gagyu sect, but which is found in Nyingma, Sagya, and Gelut as well. This is the Great Seal, the ultimate reality that marks all phenomena in the universe. Finally, there is the Hasta Mudra, literally the hand sign. In early Buddhist texts, this seems to refer to a kind of sign language. Thus, in the Jataka stories, the stories of the Buddha's lives before he became the Buddha, we find a scene in which Prince Siddhartha is seeking to discreetly determine whether a beautiful young woman is married. And so he holds up a closed fist, which conveys his question. She holds up an open hand to convey her answer. She is not married. Today, it is the Hasta Mudra that we think of when we hear the word mudra, the gesture of the hand. We know that this meaning was well known in India during the 9th century when Buddhist texts were translated from Sanskrit into Tibetan at the court of King Relbajen, because the Tibetan translation of mudra is chagya, which literally means hand sign or hand seal. When we think of mudra today, however, we tend to think of it as an element of Asian art, and particularly of Buddhist art. It's one of several markers that art historians use to identify this or that Buddha, Bodhisattva, or wrathful deity, along with their color and their accoutrements. We learned that when we see the Buddha with his left hand in his lap and his right hand pointing down, this is the Bhumi Sparsha Mudra, the earth touching gesture, that we are witnessing a famous moment that occurred on the eve of his enlightenment. And so those of us who read Buddhist texts and read Buddhist images have come to think of a mudra as something carved in stone, cast in metal, or painted on a surface. We think of them as static, as frozen in time and space, a means to determine date and provenance. But this is mistaken. We know from our own lives that we use gestures as a mode of communication, and that communication is dynamic. This means that the images that we see in art museums should be understood as freeze frames, that before the future Buddha called the goddess of the earth to witness his virtue by touching the ground with his right hand, that hand was placed upon his left hand in the mudra of equipoise. And that after the goddess of the earth affirms his virtue with a tremor, he returns his hand to his lap as he began to meditate during the 3 watches of the night, becoming a Buddha at dawn. This is a roundabout way of introducing our project, a project that we will introduce in some detail over the next 4 weeks. In essence, we're seeking to unfreeze the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. We're seeking to bring them to life, to set them in motion, to turn stone to flesh, all through the power of mudra. We seek to do this with a certain specificity, seeking to animate the particular mudra of a particular mandala, called the Vajradhatu mandala, central to 2 forms of Buddhism that seem very far apart, both in space and in sensibility, Tibetan Buddhism and Japanese Buddhism. We seek to once again make mudra a means of communication, to once again make mudra a language. And we seek to make it a universal language in the sense of a language that can speak to several disciplines at once. Joseph Halseal has therefore assembled a formidable team, a team that includes a dancer and a teacher of dance, a tantric priest, a former Tibetan Buddhist monk who is now a PhD, and one of the world's leading scholars of Himalayan art. And with that, let me turn things back over to Joseph.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez, for that wonderful introduction. I'm really grateful that you're part of this project. It's now my great pleasure to introduce my dear friend Sharon Lowen to you. She is today's speaker. Sharon is an iconic dancer of the late 20th century, internationally known as a performer of classical Indian dancing, which she learned directly from top Indian masters. Sharon has lived and taught and performed in India for more than 50 years. And it's my great pleasure to introduce her to you today. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Sharon Lowen.
Namaskar. Namaskar, Tashi Delik. I've just used 2 mudras, joint hand gesture, Anjali, and a single hand gesture, Pataka. I thank Joseph Halseal from Corps of Culture, Yangchima Art and Music, the whole foundation, and all the fellow panelists, the wonderful intro that has covered my talk by Donald Lopez, And today I'm going to be giving an introductory overview to the idea of mudra to try to offer a perspective of how it is used for spiritual and dramatic expression in classical Indian dance. Because it's just broad strokes, I know that my fellow panelists in the coming weeks will add breadth and depth to this. So this is really just an introduction to this concept as it comes from India. And to begin with, to go into a little more detail of what Donald has said, what is mudra? What is Hasta Mudra, hand? What is Abhinaya? And what is Hasta Abhinaya? So, as was just said, the Sanskrit meaning broadly is attitude, gesture, seal. And that describes these either a position or a gesture. And throughout the Indian subcontinent, this is used in yoga practice, spiritual practices, as well as Indian dance. Another definition from Kularnava Tantra is mud means to delight, and dru is to give and to draw forth. In the Shiva Sutras of Kashmiri Shaivism, you have the mudra virya, which is the pure awareness, power revealing, and the mudra krama, which is balancing then the coexistence of the self and the external. So in Kashmiri Shaivism, the mudra is this coming together, the larger and the primordial of duality. In Indian Tantrism, it simply means the parched grains that are used in the rituals. And it's also a term used for the Dakini, the Yogini consort. And of course, in Buddhism, the Mahamudra. The Gayatri mantras. The Gayatri mantra is from the Rig Veda, one of the 4 Vedas. And there are 32 traditional Veda mudras that can go with each syllable of the Gayatri mantra. And I won't go into, of course, its import, but I just listed what these mudras are. And it is performed till today by many, part of everyday life. Gayatri sadhana would be sunrise, noon, and sunset. And just as an aside, the Buddha himself made a number of references to the Gayatri or the Savitri mantra and its importance. You don't have to read this. This is just to say that he used it and referred to it. But that, as you say, if you say you're a Brahmin are, but call me none, then of you I ask the chant of Savitri, the 3 lines in 4 and 20 syllables. Mudra is also part of the Pancha Mahabhuta cosmology. Now, Pancha Bhuta is not the same Pan-Asia, but basically Agni, Vayu, Akasha, Priti, and Apas are all related to a particular finger. In yoga, you have Hasta Mudra. So that is simply the hand. It's a pose. And although here I'm showing you a dancer, but you could say that it's in a static pose, because in yoga, it's used, as you know, it affects the flow of energy through the channels. It relates to different parts of the body. Many people have been told, use this mudra or that mudra to correct something that's out of balance in your body. It regulates your prana, excuse me, your breath, your life flow. But of course, in dance, it also is there. And here's a dancer in a pose. Now, in classical Indian dance, we don't use the word mudra very much. We talk about Hasta Abhinaya because we're talking about the expression of the hands. And this is one of the most famous stanzas or slokas. I think there are hardly a dancer that doesn't know it. Where the hand goes, the eye goes. Where the eye goes, the mind follows. Where the mind goes, then comes the emotion. And where the emotional mood goes, you have the rasa, the flavor, the essence. This is from Abhinaya Darpana by Nandikeshvara, which is probably just 12th century. There are claims of it being 500 BCE, but it's probably only 12th century. And Abhinaya Darpana is a very slim book with an emphasis on the Angika Abhinaya, the Abhinaya of the body. This dramatic expression actually is in 4 forms to carry it forward. The Angika means obviously your body, so your eyes, your hands, and all of the limbs, but also in classical Indian dance, your Acharya, how you are dressed, your makeup, your ornaments are also very important, very often simply to appear as a heavenly apsara who has come down and is performing. There's symbolism in many of the aspects of it. The eyebrow like Cupid's bow, the sun and the moon on the forehead, eyes like Meena the fish. Vachika. Vachika means the text, the spoken word. There is no separation between dancer and actor in classical Indian tradition or aesthetics. The dancer is the actor, is the musician. And so when we use the hands, there are some hand movements that can be used for what is called pure dance with no abhinaya, no expression. But basically, the ultimate intent is that the text, which will be added to the hands, the body, the appearance, and ultimately involving the 4th aspect of expression, the stattvik. This is the evocation of that metaphysical, spiritually embedded and embodied emotional state. Classical Indian dance evolved out of a spiritual consciousness. Here, I've just got a slide to show you, in a way, the Acharya. The dancers on the left, these are all Bharatanatyam dancers. You can see mudras for the nose, the mirror, and Shringara. And on the right, you have the Dhananjayans, where Shanta has the lotus and Dhananjayan has the bee buzzing over it. Now, this tradition of Hasta Abhinaya classical dance has basically come down to us over the millennia, and primarily through text, Natya Shastra onwards, which I'll talk about next. Guru Shishya Parampara, from the teacher to the disciple. And this has bridged times when texts have been lesser seen or available. They've come and gone, there's been commentaries, and so they continue to reinform each other. So we have these texts, we have the traditional practice in empowerment, you could say, from the guru, and then we also have the sculptures, which allow us to then go back as a reference point, and other visual arts, paintings on Patachitras, which aren't so old. So Natya Shastra, of course, is our oldest surviving text. It's dated basically 200 BCE to 200 CE. There are dates that refer to it being earlier. We do know that Panini talked about the Natya Sutras. It's considered the 5th Veda, and as all Vedas and many important Shastras, it states in the beginning it's composed by God Brahma or another Devta, written by Bharata. Now, it was edited by his 4 sons or disciples, and some of their writings are not available in the Natya Shastra, but are available in commentaries upon it, so that it continued. Now, what's important is not so much that the Natya Shastra is the oldest, but that it is an encyclopedia. Um, it is a compilation of what the dance was at that time. This dancer and musicians are from the Rani Gumfa extant Sanskrit theater in Orissa. It's from 200 BCE. Now, I definitely do not claim that there's a direct line from the dance that I perform on the stage today to the dance that was done at that time. And yet there is a stream, and that the dance that you see on this sculpture would be the dance that would be written about in the Natya Shastra. And the Shastra is based on practice. And as as every encyclopedia, it constantly needs to be revised. So we have just 6,000 poetic verses in these 36 chapters. There were apparently many more. At the very end, it is stated, things which are not stated here should be learned by attentively watching the talk and behavior of people and used in performance. So there's a constant revising of the texts. After Natya Shastra, there was the Vishnu Dharma Matara Purana, written in between the 5th and 7th centuries, with some chapters focusing on dance. Again, all of these treatises talk about dramaturgy together: drama, acting, poetry, aesthetics, music. The most significant text by Abhinavagupta during a wonderful period in Kashmir, 10th, and he lived 10th to early 11th century. He basically, in his commentary and development, he's following Natya Shastra, but because it's 1,000 years later, we can see in it the changes that had happened in that period of time, which things had become more common, and also that there was a greater variety of dances. Now, later, after him, following his model from the 11th to 17th century, there were quite a number of commentaries that show these regional variations. One of the things that that Bharata had said that has shifted slightly in the later texts is that as these later texts came about, they talked about regional forms as deshi, of the people, provincial, and the Bharata's tradition, or what we now call classical dance, as marga. In Natya Shastra, it is very clearly stated that entertainment through dance is very nice, and that is deshi. Any dance that's entertaining is deshi, whereas dance that uses the sattvic abhinaya, that evokes the metaphysical, spiritual, transformational intent of the art, that is margi. So today, when you look at classical Indian dance that has come onto the stage, that's left the temples, the dancer has an opportunity, whether they wish to be entertaining, which much of it is, which would make it deshi, not margi, or whether you want to create a sacred space and at least aim to the spiritual and dramatic expression through the hands and the rest of the abhinaya. That was the intent. Now, when as we all know, Prince Siddhartha had great deal of practice in the Indian philosophical and yogic traditions of his day. The samatha, the single-pointed meditation, and also the vipassana, the analytical meditation that he studied for years, was the foundation that provided him the springboard to finally go under the Bodhi tree and achieve enlightenment. In the same way, the Natya Shastra and these other lineages of Shastras and other transmission has been the springboard for the spiritual consciousness in the dance to evolve and to become over the millennia what it is, and also to inform the traditions of Tibetan meditative dance practices. When His Holiness the Dalai Lama first started his Nalanda Shiksha teachings, that was teachings for children of Nalanda, which he is also, but specifically for Indians, he preceded his teaching by having an eminent Indian Sanskrit scholar give us one day of lectures about the Indian philosophical systems that informed the atmosphere at the time of the Buddha, so that we would know what was there that was the foundation from which this became possible. So besides text, we have the Guru Shishya Parampara tradition. This is my Guru, Padma Vibhushan, Guru Kelucharan Mohapatra's son, Ratikant Mohapatra. In the back is Guruji. And this tradition is continuing. And like everything, it has its pluses, its minuses, because we're all human. But it is a continuing and a blossoming organic process that keeps all of this alive and moving forward. Now let's come to the actual Hasta Abhinaya. The picture is Kudiyatam artist, wonderful artist, Kapil Venu in Kudiyatam, which has a very profound and sophisticated use of mudra. Now, the mudras that are mentioned in Abhinaya Darpana Natya Shastra are 28 single hand gestures. This is not the same in every dance tradition. We have, at the moment, we have 8 unique classical dance traditions that are unique from each other, with different numbers of such things as mudras. As I mentioned, Kathakali on the one hand lists 24, and some Kathakali artists have identified 700. So if you pardon my pronunciation, Pataka means the flag. Now, if this were static, just as we were saying, Parsh, if you use it pointing to the ground, it means one thing. The Viniyoga, how it's used, means all the difference. So I can use it, you don't need to know Sanskrit to know this is me, or this is a mirror, or that this is the wind, or that I'm opening a door or applying oil. It depends on the usage. You've got Pataka, Tripataka, 3 parts of the flag, Ardha Pataka, half flag, Kartari Mukha, which is like a scissors for eyes or cutting, Mayur, the peacock, Ardha Chandra is the half moon, Arala, we use that for drinking poison, like Nilakant, Shiva's neck is blue from drinking the poison at the churning of the ocean, or also drinking Amrit, the nectar of the gods. Shukatundaka, Mushti, Shikara. Shikara is the spire of a temple, or it can be a man. Kapita, the wood apple. Katikamukha, there's 3. Suchi, Chandrakala, digit of the moon, Padma Kosha, Sarpashirsha, Mirgashirsha. Mirgashirsha is the is like a deer, and we also use it sometimes to show a woman. Simhamukha. Simhamukha could be used. Simha is a lion, but you can use it for any animal. It could be a deer darting. It could be your cow that you're taking to drink, Krishna's cow. Kangula, Alapadma, obviously the lotus, Chatura, Brahmara. Now, for instance, Brahmara, where you curl your first finger and have your second finger over. This is Brahmara, which means the bee. In Odissi, which is a classical tradition that I do, we have a different mudra for bee. We have this with 2 fingers almost touching. we use this for a bee. And this Brahmari, we tend to use more for like a demon. Hamsasya, the eye of a swan. This is typical. This is obviously a gesture that can be used expressively for many things, saying this is true. But it is also used in, or as I said, pure dance, where there is no expression and no meaning. And it's obviously a mudra used in yoga and other practices. Hamsapaksha, the wing of a swan. Hamdansa, Mukula, Tamrachuta, Trishul. Of course, Shiva's Trishul. Now, here is like with a lamp. So I'm on the left, Odissi, the other two are Bharatanatyam. So you're holding a lamp. The two of us on the side, Hamsasya. If it's Hamsasya, we are either holding the lamp or we might be fixing the wick. Whereas Purvadhanashri in the center, she has Mayur, she's showing the flame. She's showing the flame. Then we have the Samyukta Hastas. So Anjali, because you can't, normally one would say you can't say namaste with two hands, but you can if you're saying Tashi Delek. So Anjali, and I don't have all of them here, it didn't fit very well. Utsanga, Shivalingam. Now, obviously, Shiva is here. Now, Shank, Chakra, Akat, where you take two Simhamukas and turn it down. Now, when you're doing the joint hand gestures, for instance, a good example would be like in Dasavatar. If I'm doing Matsya, the fish, or Korma, the tortoise, my hands do not make it Korma, do not make it the tortoise. The hands are part of the entire dramatic expression. So it has to be the hands, it has to be the body moving, it has to be with the music and the text and with the expression coming through. Okay, so if I have a fish, it's everything. You cannot say that this is really Matsya. This is simply the hand. Whereas if I have like the foot for the fish, Minapada, by itself, it's just an element. All of these things get meta-tagged together. Now, I would like to just show you one of the Vinaya yogas. Let's see, how do I escape? Yes. Okay. I would like to show you a Vinaya yoga because in these texts, we have each one of the mudras has a Sanskrit slokam that tells you all of the, oh, just a minute. I meant to share that and I just put it on. Back to Zoom. Yes. Yes, here we go. Vinaya yoga is the various usages of it. I chose this one because it has the English to go with it.
Amaramandal Turandu Kandanu Vayau Shayane Gamanodhyane Pratasecha Prasadecha Chandrikayam Ghanatate Kaivata Patani Sapta Vibhaktyate Tarangake Viti Pravishabhavepi Samatvecha Angaragake Atmarte Shapate Chati Tushni Bhavani Darshane आत्मार्थे शपथे क्षपे तुष्णी भावनिदर्शने तलपत्रे च खेदे च द्रव्यादिस्पर्शने तथा आशीर्वादक्रियायां च नृपश्रेष्ठस्य भावने तत्र तत्रेति वचने सिन्धौ तु सुकृतिक्रमे संबोधने पुरोविति खड्गरूपस्य धारणे मसे संवत्सरे वर्षादिने समर्जने तथा एवमर्थेषु युज्यन्ते पताकहस्तभावनाः.
Okay. All right. So the Vinyoga shows the different usage. Here's another example where I'm showing from my house, and I'm showing the roof with Hamsa Paksha, and Hamsasya, I'm going out of the house. I mean, and this is not just an ordinary story. This is about, in this tradition, the Atma going to meet the Paramatma. This is Radha leaving in order to meet Lord Krishna. Now, sculpture, the dance, the mudra. Here you have on the right Surya, and Surya, the mudra is Alapadma over the head and Tripitaka. Surya, as I'm sure you all know, rides across the sky pulled by 7 horses. So there's the 7 horses. Here you have dancers also showing being the horses. And you have the horse that's pulling the Konark temple in Odisha, because that is a temple to the sun. Surya is farther back in the temple, riding his chariot. So this is connecting what we do to the sculpture. Ramani Ranjan Jaina, Guru Ramani Ranjan Jaina as Shiva in the classic pose. Another typical Shiva pose. This I found on the net, and it's Fred Asher. It had his credit. So the great, wonderful art historian. And you can see it in dance. Here you have on the left, Jai Govind, who's French Canadian in Bharatanatyam, and you have the great Kathakali guru Sadhanam Balakrishnan. Okay, now the flute. Again, the flute is, again, the mudras will be different in different forms. On the left, Purvadanashri is using more like Simhamukha almost, whereas Tanya in the center is Hamsapaksha. In Manipuri, we would have Katakamukha. Or in Odissi, sometimes we're just using, again, this Odia Brahmari, so that it's like we're holding the flute that way. Now, Lakshmi is holding 2 lotuses, Shukatundika. This is from my Mahadevi Upasana. And here you have Lakshmi. Now, this particular pose is very typical of Devi, of Parvati. And you have a South Indian Chola bronze and a Himalayan Devi, and Bharatanatyam and Purvadanashri in the center. Now, this particular pose is not only used for the goddess, but it's also used to show a woman. It's a very feminine pose. Here you have a Madhubani multi-armed Durga, and a little bit of in dance how it can be shown. Because, as I think everyone knows the story, that when one very foolish, power-hungry Asura finished his penance, he asked for the boon that he could not be killed by a man or a god. So when he had overstepped the bounds, the gods then created a oven, and out of that came the beautiful Durga, Shakti in the form of Durga. And then they gave her all her weapons. So they had the Trishul, and she had bows and arrows and swords. And so she's got all of these weapons. And all of these mudras then are used in the dance. Now, this is in Odisha. It's a 19th century yogini temple, Chosat. There are 64 deities. And there are others in around the country. There was a great deal of in the 9th century in Orissa, just an example of Pan India, there was dancers who were dedicated to service in the temples, at that time primarily Shaivite temples. Orissa also, of course, was a place where Buddhism flourished, a spectacular university covering many acres. And so I know that we talk now about the Nalanda tradition because so many of those great masters and their texts were preserved in translation in Tibet and China. But in Orissa, there was a great deal of Buddhism, and there was also dance practice that was done, I believe, in the yogini temples, just as there would have been offerings in the Shaivite temples. And here's some of the statues that remain. And it's an open air. There's no roof because of the Panchabhuta, the elements. And the thing is that in classical dance, the intent is to use this abhinaya for spiritual and dramatic expression. Joseph asked me yesterday about do you imitate the gods? And it was an expression I had never considered. I mean, I thought, you wouldn't say to a Shakespearean actor, do you imitate Hamlet? No, you become it. And yet, I would say that when we are dancing, we are sometimes, very often, describing the qualities of the gods or goddesses, and sometimes, occasionally, we are becoming, so that we become it, and we shift back and forth. And there's a very, in my opinion, I think that there is an awareness that this becoming or describing is not limited to the duality of a particular form, because I think everyone knows that as the tradition has come down to us over the millennia, there is many paths to the ultimate reality that is unknown. And so speaking to a particular god or goddess or enacting this is the saguna. And the saguna, the duality, which we can grab a hold of and try to bring to life, leads you to the formless, to the nirguna. And that nirguna also then again comes back to finding a way to express it, as is seen not only in Hinduism, but in Buddhism. So when we perform the dance with the intention that that is one of the ways of performing it, because of course a dancer today can do whatever he or she wishes depending on their own level of development, what they want to do, what they've learned from their guru. But the ultimate aim of this art coming down to us from Natya Shastra is this metaphysical spiritual expression. And so the dance actually is a puja. It is an offering. And of course, I mean, Natya Shastra has all of the rules, how you begin the dance, how you enter, how you make your offering to your Bhumi Pranam, to the earth, to the directions, to the gods, how you conclude it. It's not just coming out there and doing whatever you want. So the dancer then in the performance ideally aims to create this 3D representation to the viewer that will give them the kind of darshan that when they go into a temple that they would ideally get from seeing the image. And I think that for the viewer, when they're watching a tantric meditation cham dance, that is the same thing. They are getting that darshan. Let's see. I'm going to just leave this. Okay. I'm going to just show an example of that, of description of a deity, and then just a little bit of what it is. And then I'm going to conclude with this Sharba Mangalam, which is the auspicious blessing. We end a traditional Odissi program with an item that's called moksha. It's a little bit of pure dance followed by a sloka. The most popular one is Sharba Mangalam. And that is salutations to Narayani, who of course is sister of Vishnu and is the consort of Shiva. And we surrender. She's the refuge of all, the three-eyed Shiva. And I will show that as a video. Let's see, how do I get out of here? Here we go, thank you. Right, okay. Now I'd like to just show you at Joseph's suggestion. So in terms of describing would be, for instance, if I'm going to show Ganapati, we want to ask him for wisdom, so we have to give him praise. So for that, I will say Namaskar, then I will show him with his trunk reaching for a ladu, and I'll say that you are sitting under the wish-fulfilling tree, that your mother, Uma, is very proud of you, her wonderful son, you have a great presence, wonderful tusks, you're a fabulous dancer, your father, Shiva, is also very proud of you because you dance holding snakes in your hands, and so I ask you every day, give me pure wisdom. So that is purely descriptive, purely a request. Now, if I'm doing another thing, Om Karakarani, which is a composition to a modern Vagyakaran, Balamurli Krishna. It begins descriptive, Om Karakarani, she who is the form of every conventional thing in the world, Om Karakarani, and I'm asking you to take my vanity and to dispel it, please. But then I'm going to become her, so that Hunkar, simply the tantric syllable that she uses, is enough to destroy the enemies, and this sound, this tantric syllable that comes up through her as she, with two eyes, and the one will be destructive. And so it goes, describing her and becoming her as well. And now I want to just end by sharing with you, as a proper conclusion, a Mangalam, Sharba Mangalam. This is a performance that was done in New York at the Metropolitan Museum. And let's see if I can find this. Where is it? Dun, dun, dun. This is a performance that was done at the Metropolitan Museum at the end of the Festival of India. I'm going to just make sure this is open. Ooh, this is closed. Sorry. This is done by my guru and myself. At the end of this tour that we had done. And I think I have it, yes. So this has been my quick overview of spiritual and dramatic expression through the hands as part of the Angika Abhinaya in classical Indian dance, along with Acharya, Vajika, and Sattvic. I hope it's not too elementary for everybody.
Sharon, thank you so very much for that wonderful talk. And I must say how wonderful it was to see you conclude with the essence of it all, you performing with your teacher. This was what you started out talking about, the transmission between the guru and the student. And you see in this lovely performance you showed, it's a way of life. This is not an avocation. This is a vocation that lasts an entire lifetime. I'm going to ask all of the panelists to unmute because one by one, I'm going to ask each panelist now, who are the other speakers, if they would like to ask Sharon a question or make an observation on Sharon's presentation. We are very lucky today that Dr. Tinlis Dorji has signed in from Ladakh. We've had some issues with Ladakh, so it's great to see Dr. Tinlis Dorji here today. And so I'm going to begin with him as our sign of good luck. Dr. Tinlis Dorji, would you like to make a comment about Sharon's talk or share an observation or ask Sharon a question?
All right. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to ask a question. Have you ever experienced, while you perform, like you suppose you're performing Shiva dance, okay? Have you ever experienced that the Shiva transform into you and you lost your own identity?
I think that as a performing artist, you are both transformed, but you're also aware of everything. I mean, you know what's going on, you know your spacing, you know the lights, but you are transformed. You see, you have to feel what you have to feel. You have to be totally identified. You have to be that, and then you discover. I mean, I'll give you one example. When I had choreographed Kumar Sambhavam for National Program of Durdashan, we did 5 Nayakas of Kalidas. And when I did Kumar Sambhavam, and at the end of the composition, toward the end, Parvati touches the feet of Shiva, and then looks up. It was so electric and tingling because when I choreographed it, when I touched the feet and then I looked at him, I was like, I had always been doing Radha. Radha and Krishna, their relationship is totally different. And whereas when Parvati looks at Shiva, she is the activating agent. I mean, they are one. This is Ardhanarishwar. She is the equal. This is not the relationship of Radhesham. But it's like I discovered by becoming, identifying, and being Parvati, then looking at Shiva, I could see it. Or for instance, dancing in, you see, dancing in Sankat Mochan, the first non-Hindu dancing there. So I'm doing all of these Hanuman Dhyana slokas. These are things that people do, every day of their lives. To me, it's new. We all know Hanuman, but I haven't intimately gone into it. But the thing is that you have to become Hanuman so that when you bite a pearl from the necklace to see whether Ram is really inside, I mean, you have to be there. So I don't know if I can totally answer your question, because you are doing that, but you're still yourself at the same time. I mean, it's not a trance. In Manipur, where they have like an unbroken tradition, there, of course, they have the Maibis who do go into trances. They're shamanistic, and there, when children play Radha Krishna, people actually worship them. You can't leave the performance while certain parts are going on, Bangi Pareng. But I don't think the children necessarily would feel that they're Radha and Krishna when people are, doing that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Tinless, that was a great question that goes to the heart of a lot of things, the performing experience, the meditation experience, which is really what we're talking about. That's a really good question. And I'll bet we come back to that question a number of times over the course of this. What's the actuality for the performer of these mudras? So thank you for that question.
I'd like to know later, not right now, but I would like to know from both Tindley and Prajwal, how deeply, when you're in that meditative state, you go into it, you become, and how much when you become, are you aware of other things? That'll be later.
Wonderful things to be exploring. I'm looking forward to it myself. I'm just going to move down our panelist list. Dr. Luxanitz, may I ask you, please, for a comment or a question? And you need to unmute.
Yes, I need to unmute. Yeah, thanks. That was a wonderful presentation, and I think it showed very nicely how dynamic Mudra actually is in a certain way. And also how you gave quite a few examples of the interplay between sculpture and dance. But so my question would be, do you have a specific example or a time period where you think mudra and or the mudras of sculptures and dance particularly align with each other?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lovely question. And I would, I can only answer for my personal experience and the experience of the kind of reconstructions of classical Indian dance forms in the last couple of hundred years. So as I said, I mean, there was the sculpture from 200 BC in Odissi, but that's not really necessarily I wouldn't say that that's informing the dance, although it informed and went along. The dance that I do is informed by the sculptures from Jagannath Puri and Konark, which are all like 11th, 12th century, where we have these actual sculptures of the dancers, which, I mean, you have your Natya Mandap, the place for dance in the front of the temple. And so that is a living reference for us. Other temples that are earlier, we don't necessarily have. In Padma Subramaniam, for instance, did amazing research that the what are called Karanas, the 108 Karanas, the sculptures at Chittambaram, they're a pose, but there are other temples that have the Karanas and they're different. And eventually she was able to realize that the Karanas are actually a dynamic phrase or a movement. You know, Akash Bhumi, you're going from sky to the earth. And so by putting together what's in the different temples and one in Indonesia to figure out what it was. So we do look at these for references, and there are some temples that go back, as I said, around 9th century, 7th century, but we don't really have a lot of older stone representations. And then, you know, in Orissa, there's the Patachitra and the palm leaf. But obviously, you know, the age of those things is limited. You know, how old are those drawings? So, you know, my reference goes back to what was done, what was put on the temples of Jagannath Puri, really. And yet, that was, I mean, we know from many other things that that dance was based on what was before and what was done in the Shaivite temples. And in the Natya Shastra, it is stated that the dance of Kalinga, you know, of the East Coast, with Orissa, that it was known for its abhinaya, for its expression. And just because it was known at that time doesn't mean that it didn't go up and down and up and down, but it kept flowing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. I like the sculpture keeps flowing. That's what I take away from that. But again, this is another really fecund area of discovery, the relationship between the sculpture and the movement tradition. So thank you. Sri Prajwal, may I ask if you've got something to comment on or a question for Sharon?
Sure. It's really, really lovely. And also that you brought a whole histories about the dance tradition in India and the Natya Shastra. It was amazing, amazing. It's like at a high level of the scholarly presenting. So, and that's just really, really, also it's, for me, it's like I studied the Kathak dance for 6 years, intensive study from my 80s. So it's also remind me like all the Pataka, Tripataka, all the mudras that I completely forget about that part. So, you know, in my world, in the different world. So, but it's amazing that it's in the art we express that. But my questions for you is like, if when you do the dancings and practicing, just only practice dance, or you have some sadhana or meditations in the Gurukula traditions, like they make you to the meditation, visualizations, like let's say you have a dancing mostly in Radha and Krishna's, or Shiva and Parvati is mostly in that tradition. Do you do like the sadhana or praise or chant or meditations before you come out into the dance?
That is a wonderful question. And the answer is that, okay, I've got a couple of answers. In the way that I learned and many dancers learn, it's not formalized, but it's still necessary because you can't get very far. So when I tell my students that your life, how you live it, and your spiritual development, everything is half of your riyaz, it's half your practice. So whatever you're learning in terms of skill and everything, it's not going to take you very far until you grow as a human being. When I learned from my guru, I would say this, that I did not, first of all, I didn't come to India to become an Indian dancer. I continued my Manipuri as a cultural entree for a period of time that I would be in India. I did not come as a number of international students do, coming because they know there's a spiritual connect. Because of doing the dance, it's like unpeeling the onion. You start to go deeper. Basically, depending on how you approach it, the dance is about love, truth, and beauty, and not saccharine or sweet, but actual love, truth, and beauty. If you're focused on that, it will take you as part, the sadhana of the practice takes you into the philosophy, takes you into the spirituality, so that if I am learning a composition, a dance composition, I need to know who is the poet. Is it from the Bhakti period? Is it from Sangam? Is it Sahitya, Vaishnavism, not Gaudiya? I need to understand what was the spiritual and cultural context of it. So that really takes me into it. Now, when I did a seminar once, Sadhanam Balakrishnan, the Kathakali guru, I love his talk. He said, he starts out by saying, we all know foreigners can't do Kathakali because number one, you have to believe in God and you have to be in a gurukul, because the gurukul will give you that sadhana, that practice. And then by the end of his talk, he's saying that, well, they know that, but they learn and then they do. And then finally, they really do okay. And they can do it. When I learned with my guru, who you saw me having the honor of dancing with, he has daily rituals. He has his own small temple at home. And so when you are a student in a traditional Guru Shishya Parampara, living there for some time, you're not only dancing, but all of the attitudes toward everything, toward nature, toward living, everything is communicated through your guru. He's not a spiritual guru, he's a dance guru, but still, he is, deeply involved. And then we participate in his puja. And then, of course, I realized first time I danced in Manipur in the temple and I had to bow down and I didn't get hit by lightning. Then I realized that I didn't have, non-duality is what it's all about. So I think that personally, and then I would also say that by being so, being fortunate enough to be having a profession that is about something that's metaphysical, that's what then took me to the level of practicing, attempting to practice somewhat the Dharma, because, you know, it's an evolution. So I think that all I can say is that there is not necessarily a formal way that the dance is taught along with spirituality. I would say, for instance, with my students, I do not want students to be getting dressed up and performing. They need stage practice. The way they should get stage practice is by dancing in a temple. So at the time of Navarasa, they should offer their dance. It should be performed for people who are there not for classical dance, but as devotees to see the deity. But I'm afraid it's a very individual process that would depend on the guidance of the teacher and motivation of the individual. And I was kind of relieved when Lakshmi Vishwanathan spoke at this Manodharma festival I did. And she said, it's really nowadays the student's responsibility to go deep and to do the research. You know, can't all be spoon-fed. I mean, you know, we're in today's world. It's very different for how a student, how much time they are with their guru and how much you can give them. But, you know, I try with my students to keep them on the fact that you can do whatever you want with the dance, but what's special about this dance is this intent, and that's why I love to do it, and that's what the students who come to me want to know about.
Yeah, that's great, yeah. When I was studying the Kathak dance, you know, I was never spinning that long, that spinning with the 100 spinning. And when I was about to vomit, like I couldn't, you know, DGs and, you know, and you can vomit here, you keep spinning. That's my teacher. It's in the, I'm like, wow, this is amazing how you can transform your bodies to doing the actions like a Karma Mudras, you know, you're just doing that way. So my experience after learning was like they don't that much, I don't get this influence with like the meditations and doing meditation in bodies with that practice. But you do, then your body will become as itself in the transformation is happening.
Yes, and it's like, I mean, obviously the spinning, it could be a little bit like Sufi spinning, you know, put you in a state.
Yeah.
But, you know, I've actually, in terms of the actual dance practice, you see, I came to Indian dance after 17 years of modern dance and ballet. So I could like do everything. And I flexibility, strength, and control. You know, I just had to learn and remember. And so I never wanted to do the kind of practice where it isn't with total involvement. And I want to hear the singer, I want to hear the text and react to the text when I hear it, which means that if the singer isn't clear, I don't know what to do. In other words, I didn't want to do it by rote. So when a dancer would say, oh, I practiced that 100 times, and I would be like, my God, you squeezed all the rasa out of it. What's left there? You know?
I think Prajwal has answered a very important question too that does respond to the modern world. What is the role of movement in spirituality, period? Almost any dancer in any tradition will tell you it becomes a way of life. And in as much as dancing becomes a way of life, but it connects to Tinlith's question as well of what's the actual internal activity, which is something we're going to be exploring more. So these are all really interesting questions about whether that making it spiritual is part of the practice or outside of the practice or a modern individual thing you do. But I think that one of the things, Sharon, you and I have talked about is that in any case, classical Indian dancing lends itself, if you want to make a spiritual practice out of it, you most certainly can because of its content and approach. I want
You
to,
don't have to, but you can.
because of our time, I want to reach out to Dr. Lopez one more time and see if Dr. Lopez has a comment or an observation or a question he'd like to make.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. That was so informative and to cover so much material so clearly was a great, great skill. So thank you so much. I had a question about this Deshi Margi distinction, which I guess we could translate as popular versus soteriological. And I wondered whether this is primarily a kind of a literary category, or does it really play out in actual performance? Because as we know, the line between entertainment and inspiration can be quite vague. And it's also the case that Buddhist monks and nuns, whether they are novices or fully ordained, take a vow not to attend dramatic performances. And so the question is, but we know that in Tibet and in Ladakh, they do perform and they do attend. And so I wondered if you could just expand a bit on that Deshi Margi sort of the distinction. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll attempt. You know, we all know the issues of translation. So in English, the standard thing is people say classical and classical dance, these 8 styles are classical, meaning Margi, and that folk dance is Deshi, right? That you've got classical and folk. But according to the Natya Shastra, the dance that we're calling classical only becomes classical, Margi, if the intention is coming from this spiritual consciousness and aiming, to evoke this. If your aim is only entertainment, it's Deshi. And I think it's understandable, and I'm not a scholar, so others could answer this better, but that as the later texts and medieval texts started talking about these variants, different parts of the country, they're talking about folk dances. And I mean, when I was in the dance department, we had this definition of folk and classical. That classical is done for an audience, whether it's a god, a king, or a public, whereas folk is done communally, for yourself. I mean, either to invoke or social, you're invoking the rain gods. And so I think that there are so many folk traditions, which are, easily to be done, that just all got called Deshi. I think it just got smushy.
If I may, just to clarify, in terms of dance preservation, Sharon, in my studying the Asian dances, I got hit with this classical and folk thing a lot in India. And the definition I got was it was classical if it connected to a text. And if it didn't connect to a text, it wasn't classical. And I spent the next 20 years with Indian dancers saying that's all nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. But the Westerners making this division of classical and folk then tended to prioritize focusing on what they called classical dancing as a superior form of dancing. And I've had that notion corrected many times. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have many thoughts. It would take another whole thing. Basically, to be recognized, at the time of independence, I'm going to talk fast a little. At the time of independence, there were 4 styles recognized as classical. There are many, many more. In Kerala, you've got many, but we only call Kathakali because the rest of the country wouldn't like it if you had 10 forms that were classical from Kerala. And the reason they were recognized was because of certain people who had promoted and done a great deal to make them recognized. And this text-based Sanskritized, it's like a girdle. You have to squeeze your dance style into it. And so Odissi, which is what I do, which is a classical style, you have, I wrote a thing for University of Heidelberg about this, Shastra and Odissi, years ago. It's like, first of all, you've got to stop using your local language and you've got to translate everything into Sanskrit. right? And if it says Natambare, as she did in that video, that is Pataka. So if you were doing this, well, now we'll do that. So you gotta shift, right? And if you've got some body movement that looks too folky, well, we can kind of like, so basically it's like you've got to squeeze it into this Sanskrit mold so that certain people in Delhi who are authoritative will then recognize it. And so Odissi was considered just this regional corrupt offshoot until it was not, by jumping through the loops.
Interesting. Thank you.
And, and this thing about Shastra is that, you've got, it's got to be Shastric, which is not actually the definition of what's classical. In other words, the forms that are classical do fit the Western definition in the sense that, they're for an audience. Everyone can't do it. You have a large vocabulary. You need a lot of training.
No, those are all really good and subtle distinctions. And again, something I think we'll be exploring more, because we're talking, I think Donald might be pointing out a little bit, the difference between classifications and real practice and real life, and how things become codified or when they get codified, and how that impacts actual practice. So every single question today is, to me, opened up a whole wonderful chest of great questions. We don't have much time. We have some interesting questions from the audience. We're going to have all of those answered in turn. But today, Sharon, I want to give you just one of them. We've got a couple minutes left. And this is a loaded question that you could do another lecture on, but maybe just a comment on how important is story for dance? How reliant is story for dance? And if you can do that in a few minutes, that would be great.
Yeah, I think I could do it even shorter.
Okay.
There's two aspects to the dramatic expression. One is story and developing the story. I mean, we take a text and then you might take one line and then that line might repeat 8 times, 16 times, and you keep developing a story out of that. But there's also the more challenging, where you're not only doing a story, but you're doing something that is conceptual, something that's philosophical. And that's where you come into the nirguna, where you're doing this interpretation that is an emotional embodiment and that you're bringing to life, but not necessarily within a story. And that can be done, but it's obviously harder.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to make a special thank you to Yang Chengma Arts and Music, to Christiana, and to Simone, who have made this process very simple and easy for us. Thank you so very much, Yang Chengma. If you have a few comments to take us out, Christiana, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Thank you, Sharon. That was so fascinating. This is an amazing project. I'm really honored that you invited us to be a part of it. And to all there's lots of thanks in the chat. So many thank yous, and also wishes to study more with you, Sharon, if that's an option. Students, new students. And I'd just like to announce the schedule. This is just the beginning. So next week, we will have Prajwal Ratna Vajracharya, who will give the program at the same time on Wednesday. His topic is Mudra as an agent of transformation in Newar Buddhism. So Prajwal is a regular teacher here with us, and many of you have studied. He's really an incredible teacher and dancer and performer and ritual master. So that's next week. Please join us at the same time. And then following that, we will have Dr. Tinle Dorje joining us from Ladakh, talking about mudra transmission within Vajrayana Buddhist monasteries. So we will all pray for good internet in Ladakh so we can hear this wonderful presentation. And then finally on October 28th, we have Dr. Christian Ligzanitz, who will present a presentation on mudra and the Vajradhatu mandala of the Tabu Assembly Hall. So you will get a peek into the mandala itself. And this is really an honor that all of the panelists, including Dr. Donald Lopez will be here every week so we can have this amazing ongoing discussion from these different perspectives and more questions. And so this is really a great honor. Please come back every Wednesday for the next 3 Wednesdays. If you've already registered, you don't need to register again. You will receive the link in your inbox every week. Thank you again, Joseph. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of it.
Thank you. We'll see you all next week, everybody. I'm looking forward to that talk. It's going to be great.